Of course, some members of my family will never forgive me for writing a book. Of course, they will never forgive me for lots of things. But, you know, there is. I would love reconciliation with my family. There's no point in continuing to fight anymore. As I said, life is precious. I don't know how much longer my father has.
These were Prince Harry's words to his closest friend just weeks before he sent the most important letter of his life to Buckingham Palace. The invitation that arrived on King Charles's desk wasn't just a request to attend the 2027 Invictus Games, it was Harry's final, desperate gamble to save his royal legacy. Before it was too late, a last-ditch attempt to prove that the son his father once loved still existed beneath the California exile. But what happened next would shatter Harry's hopes forever and seal his fate as the royal family's permanent outcast. Palace insiders who witnessed the aftermath describe it as one of the most heartbreaking moments in recent royal history, because the response that came back, or rather the response that never came, would destroy Harry in ways he never imagined possible. This isn't the story of a simple family feud. This is the story of a desperate man's final plea for love, and why the silence that followed all will haunt him for the rest of his life. Picture this scene unfolding on a quiet Tuesday morning in Montecito, California. The Pacific mist hangs heavy over the Santa Barbara Mountains as Prince Harry sits alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his new American life. But his mind is 3,000 miles away, in the corridor of Buckingham Palace, where his father battles cancer behind closed doors. On the mahogany desk before him lies a single sheet of cream-coloured paper, the same royal stationery he once used without thinking during his palace days. His hands shake slightly as he picks up his fountain pen, a gift from his grandmother on his 18th birthday. The words he's about to write will either rebuild the bridges he's burned or destroy his last chance at redemption forever. Meghan has taken the children to their morning activities. The house is silent, except for the distant sound of waves against the Miramar Beach cliffs. Harry has been awake since 4 a.m, rehearsing what he wants to say, knowing that every word must be perfect. Because this isn't just a letter, this is his final roll of the dice. 3,000 miles away, King Charles sits in his private study at Windsor Castle. The cancer treatment has left him frailer than the public knows, but his mind remains sharp. On his desk, official red boxes wait to be reviewed, but his attention is drawn to something else entirely. A thick envelope bearing his youngest son's handwriting has just arrived via secure courier, not through official channels, not through private secretaries, but directly from Harry himself, marked private and confidential, father. Charles stares at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. He doesn't know that inside lies either his son's surrender or his declaration of war. What neither man knows is that Prince William has already made a decision that will determine the outcome before the letter is even read. To understand why this letter would become Harry's final gamble, we need to journey back through the wreckage of a relationship that once seemed unbreakable. There was a time where Harry was the apple of his father's eye, the spare who brought joy and laughter to a family bound by tradition and duty. Charles delighted in Harry's rebellious spirit, seeing in his younger son a freedom he'd never been allowed to express. But that was before Megxit changed everything. When Harry announced his intention to step back from royal duties in January 2020, palace insiders described Charles as utterly blindsided. The king-in-waiting had envisioned a future where both his sons worked alongside him, sharing the burden of modern monarchy. Harry's departure wasn't just a professional loss. It felt like personal abandonment. His father took it as a rejection of everything Charles had tried to build, reveals a former courtier who witnessed those dark days. Harry wasn't just leaving his royal duties, he was leaving his father. The Oprah interview 8 months later felt like a public execution of the royal family's reputation. Harry and Meghan's revelations about racism, mental health, and feeling unsupported by the institution sent shockwaves through the palace corridors. But for Charles, the most devastating moment came when Harry spoke about their private conversations. Father-son exchanges shared during Harry's darkest moments were suddenly being broadcast to millions worldwide. That interview broke something fundamental between them, explains a senior royal correspondent. Trust, once shattered, becomes almost impossible to rebuild. The Netflix documentary series Harry and Meghan drove the wedge deeper. 6 episodes of intimate revelations about royal family dynamics, private arguments, and behind-the-scenes tensions that had never been meant for public consumption. Palace staff described watching each episode like like witnessing a slow-motion car crash. Every personal detail shared felt like another betrayal, another violation of the family's unwritten code of silence. But it was Harry's memoir, Spare, that truly severed the final threads. In those pages, Harry revealed conversations with Charles that even his closest friends had never heard. He wrote about physical confrontations with William, shared intimate details about his stepmother Camilla, and exposed family vulnerabilities that had carefully been guarded for decades. The book's revelations about private family moments during Diana's funeral, the aftermath of her death, and Harry's struggles with addiction and mental health painted a picture of dysfunction that the palace couldn't deny or defend against. Every page felt like another knife in the back, admits one palace insider. How could they ever trust him with private information again when everything seemed to end up in a book? The legal battles made reconciliation even more difficult. Harry's court case against British media outlets, initially viewed sympathetically by his family, began to feel like attacks on the very system they represented. When Harry testified against Associated Newspapers, he made statements about his family that went beyond even his book's revelations. Each court appearance seemed to generate new headlines, new controversies, new reason for the palace to maintain their distance. By 2024, communication had broken down completely. Charles and William weren't just refusing to see Harry, they were actively avoiding any situation where they might encounter him. When Charles's cancer diagnosis was announced in February 2024, Harry flew to London immediately. But the reunion was brief and cold, just 45 minutes at Clarence House before Harry was politely but firmly asked to leave. The message was clear: Harry had made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences. But Harry wasn't ready to accept defeat, not while his father was fighting for his life. Here's what really happened when Harry's letter arrived at the palace, details that will break your heart and change everything you thought you knew about this fractured family. The letter was 12 pages long, handwritten on Harry's personal stationery. It took him nearly a week to complete, with multiple drafts discarded as inadequate for the task at hand. Palace sources who witnessed Charles reading the letter describe it as devastating in its raw honesty. Harry laid bare his regrets, his mistakes, and his desperate longing to find a path back to his family's heart. But the centerpiece wasn't an apology, it was an invitation. Harry was extending a formal request for King Charles and Prince William to attend the 2027 Invictus Games in Birmingham, not as a publicity stunt or media opportunity, but as family members supporting something that represented Harry's greatest achievement. "I know I've hurt you," Harry wrote in his careful script. "I know I've broken your trust in ways that may be unforgivable, but please don't let my mistakes cost us the time we have left together." The letter included specific memories from Harry's childhood, moments when Charles had been not just a future king, but a loving father, times when they'd worked together on environmental projects, shared private jokes, dreamed about Harry's future role in the royal family. Harry also wrote extensively about his military service, reminding Charles of how proud his father had been when Harry earned his wings, when he served in Afghanistan, when he created the Invictus Games from his own experiences with wounded veterans. "The Invictus Games represent everything you taught me about service," Harry continued. "They exist because you showed me that privilege comes with responsibility, that we must use our positions to help others." But perhaps most poignantly, Harry wrote about time itself. He had been watching his father's public appearances since the cancer diagnosis. He could see Charles growing frailer, moving more slowly, speaking more quietly. The robust man who had waited 73 years to become king was visibly struggling with his treatment. "I see how tired you look," Harry confessed. "I see how this illness is taking its toll, and I'm terrified that we'll run out of time to fix what's broken between us." The invitation to Birmingham was strategic. Harry chose the 2027 Invictus Games specifically because it would take place on British soil, in a city with deep royal connections. He was offering his family a chance to witness his life's work in their own country, surrounded by the wounded veterans whose lives had been transformed by his vision. Palace insiders reveal that Charles read the letter 3 times on the morning it arrived. Staff members describe him as visibly emotional, pausing frequently to compose himself as he absorbed his son's words. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like Harry's gamble might actually work. But then Prince William arrived for his weekly meeting with his father, and everything changed. The heir to the throne's response to Harry's letter was swift and devastating. William reminded Charles of every betrayal, every public revelation, every moment when Harry had chosen personal gain over family loyalty. "Every conversation we have with him becomes content for his next interview," William reportedly told his father. "Every moment of vulnerability becomes ammunition for his next attack on our family." William's argument was brutal in its logic. Harry had established a clear pattern of monetizing private family moments. the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, the court testimonies, all had featured intimate details about conversations that should have remained confidential. The future king's position was uncompromising. Accepting Harry's invitation would send a dangerous message that royal family members could betray the institution repeatedly and still expect to be welcomed back when it suited them. William essentially gave Charles an ultimatum, reveals a palace source: accept Harry's invitation and risk everything we've worked to rebuild, or maintain the boundaries that protect our family and our institution. Charles found himself trapped between his heart and his crown. Every paternal instinct urged him to respond to his son's plea, to use the Invictus Games as neutral ground for beginning a careful reconciliation, but his duty as king demanded that he consider the long-term implications. Could he trust Harry to keep their reunion private? Could he risk another round of public revelations about private family moments? The decision that followed would haunt both father and son for years to come. After 3 days of agonizing deliberation, Charles made his choice, but it wasn't the choice Harry was hoping for. The response from Buckingham Palace was more devastating than any angry rejection could have been. Silence. 3 weeks passed without any acknowledgement of Harry's letter. No phone call, no written response, no message through intermediaries, just complete, crushing silence that spoke louder than any words could have. Palace sources confirm this wasn't an oversight or administrative delay. The silence was a calculated decision, approved at the highest levels of the royal household. Harry waited by his phone every day. He checked his private email obsessively. He even reached out to former palace staff and mutual friends, hoping for any sign that his letter had been received, that his father had read his words. Nothing. The non-response was more cruel than outright rejection, because it told Harry something far worse than no. It told him he wasn't worth a reply. He wasn't worth consideration. He wasn't even worth the courtesy of acknowledgement. Sources close to the Sussexes describe Harry as completely shattered by the palace's silence. He had convinced himself that his heartfelt letter, combined with his father's illness and the meaningful nature of the Invictus Games invitation, would at least earn him a conversation. Instead, he learned that the door wasn't just closed, it had been welded shut from the inside. Meghan's reaction was fierce protectiveness tinged with righteous anger. She reportedly told Harry that his family's silence proved what she had suspected all along. They had never intended to forgive him, regardless of his efforts or the sincerity of his remorse. They've shown you exactly who they are. Sources quote Meghan as telling her husband, "Stop torturing yourself by hoping they'll change." But perhaps the most heartbreaking detail is what palace staff witnessed during those 3 weeks of deliberation. Charles reportedly reread Harry's letter multiple times. He was seen carrying it with him during his daily walks around Windsor's private gardens, stopping occasionally to study particular passages. Staff members described the king as genuinely torn by the decision he faced. Several times, he began drafting responses to his son's letter, only to set them aside unfinished. The emotional toll was visible to everyone around him. Charles's already fragile health seemed to deteriorate further during this period, leading to concerns among his medical team about the stress of the unresolved situation. But ultimately, institutional concerns won out over paternal instincts. Prince William, meanwhile, showed no such conflict. Palace sources described the heir as resolute in his position that responding to Harry would set a dangerous precedent. William reportedly viewed Harry's invitation not as a genuine peace offering, but as another calculated move in a long-running publicity campaign. The timing, coming as Harry faced mounting legal costs and declining public approval ratings, seemed suspiciously convenient. William believes Harry only wants reconciliation now because his life in California isn't working out as planned, explains a senior royal correspondent. He sees this as opportunistic rather than genuine. The heir to the throne's influence over his father's decision cannot be understated. As the future king, William's concerns about institutional stability carried enormous weight in palace deliberations. The strategy of silence was brilliant in its cruelty. By not responding at all, the palace denied Harry the very thing he had repeatedly violated: access to private family interactions that could later be shared publicly. There would be no conversations to record, no emotional moments to analyze, no private exchanges to appear in future interviews or books. This failed reconciliation attempt represents far more than one family's internal drama. It signals a fundamental transformation in how the modern monarchy protects itself from internal threats. The royal family's decision to ignore Harry's heartfelt plea demonstrates their evolution into something harder and more calculating than previous generations. This is the House of Windsor choosing institutional survival over emotional healing, even when that choice comes at enormous personal cost. The implications extend far beyond the palace walls. For King Charles, this decision means accepting that he may never reconcile with his youngest son while battling a potentially terminal illness. The weight of choosing duty over the possibility of redemption must be crushing for a man who has always prided himself on being a devoted father. The psychological impact on Harry cannot be understated. This rejection represents the final proof that his royal life is truly over. No amount of charitable work, personal growth, or heartfelt contrition will earn him forgiveness for his past betrayals. But the broader significance for the monarchy is perhaps most important of all. This hardline approach establishes a new precedent for how the institution handles internal dissent. The message is clear: absolute loyalty is required, and betrayal carries permanent consequences. Royal historians note that this represents a departure from Queen Elizabeth II's approach to family conflicts. The late Queen often chose to maintain relationships even when family members caused public embarrassment or controversy. Charles and William have opted for a different strategy, one that prioritizes the Crown's reputation over family harmony. The risk, according to royal experts, is that this approach could backfire spectacularly. Harry's desperation, combined with his proven willingness to share private family details publicly, makes him a dangerous enemy. When people feel they have nothing left to lose, they often choose scorched earth tactics, warns one veteran royal correspondent. Harry's silence since this rejection may not be acceptance, it may be preparation for his most devastating attack yet. The royal family appears to be gambling that their silence will eventually force Harry to abandon his reconciliation efforts and fade into irrelevance, but they're also risking that this final rejection could trigger the very public revelations they've been trying to avoid. The failure of Harry's final peace offering leaves the House of Windsor permanently fractured, with consequences that will echo through generations of the royal family. For Harry, this rejection marks the end of hope and the beginning of a new chapter built on acceptance rather than longing. Palace sources suggest he has finally internalized the reality that reconciliation is impossible while his father and brother remain on the throne. The 2027 Invictus Games will proceed in Birmingham without royal attendance, serving as a permanent monument to what Harry sacrificed when he chose independence over duty. Every medal ceremony, every veteran's triumph, every moment of inspiration will be shadowed by the knowledge that Harry's greatest achievement couldn't earn him 5 minutes of his family's time. King Charles faces an uncertain future, knowing that his battle with cancer may conclude without ever healing the rift with his younger son. The king who waited longer than any heir in British history to wear the crown may leave it without ever resolving his greatest personal failure. Prince William's strategy has succeeded in protecting the institution, but history will judge whether the cost was worth the victory. The future king has effectively erased his brother from the royal family's story, a decision that will define his reign before it even begins. Perhaps most tragically, Harry's children are growing up without meaningful connections to their royal heritage. Archie and Lilibet may never know their grandfather or uncle beyond newspaper headlines and documentary footage. The human cost of institutional protection is measured not just in broken relationships, but in lost opportunities for healing, growth, and redemption that will never come again. Recent reports suggest Harry has entered a new phase of acceptance, focusing entirely on building his American life while letting go of his British past. But those who know him best warn that acceptance and forgiveness are very different things. The silence that greeted Harry's final plea may have closed one chapter, but it may also have opened another, one that could prove far more dangerous for the royal family than anything Harry has done so far. Harry's desperate final gamble raises profound questions about family, forgiveness, and the price we pay for our mistakes. Should King Charles have responded to his son's heartfelt invitation, choosing fatherhood over institutional concerns? Was Prince William right to prioritize the crown's stability over brotherly compassion? At what point do past betrayals make someone unworthy of redemption, regardless of how sincere their attempts at reconciliation might be? These aren't just questions about the Windsor family. They reflect the impossible choices between personal relationships and professional responsibilities that many of us face in our own lives. What we've witnessed is the crystallization of a new royal family structure where love must be earned through absolute compliance, where forgiveness requires not just remorse, but guaranteed future loyalty. Harry's invitation to share his proudest achievement with his father and brother will remain forever unanswered, and in that silence lies a tragedy that extends far beyond palace walls, the recognition that some bridges once burned can truly never be rebuilt. Was this Harry's genuine attempt at redemption, or just another calculated move in a long-running publicity publicity campaign. Should families ever completely close the door on reconciliation, no matter how deep the wounds or how many times trust has been broken? The story of Harry's final gamble is ultimately a story about all of us, about the choices we make when pride battles love, when institutional loyalty conflicts with family bonds, and when the desire for redemption meets the reality of consequences. Share your thoughts about whether Harry's desperate plea deserved a response and what his family's silence tells us about the true cost of betrayal in our modern world.